Welcome to the C3 podcast. C3 stands for Compassion, Community, and Commitment. And we're here to bring you the stories of those in our community living out these values and making an impact for the kingdom. And now, let's get started.
I want to welcome everyone to the C3 podcast. I'm your host today, Pastor Conan Stevens, lead pastor here at C3 Church, and glad to, for the second week now, we are both audio and video. If you're watching, I want to say we're glad you're here. And I'm with a friend of mine I've known for 8 years. So I want to welcome Kristin Martin to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Conan.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Kristin is definitely part of our really community here at C3 Church, and I'm excited to get into your story because I know you have a lot to share. I know a lot of people have been following you on Facebook, and so let's not wait any longer. Let's jump into it. So I would love to hear. Let's start about your growing up. What did that look like for you to kind of set foundation for where we're going today? So.
Sure. So I grew up on a horse farm, actually not far from here in Canal, Winchester. I have an older brother, and my dad worked at Bob Evans, and my mom is a med tech for Siemens. And so we spent a lot of hours outside. We had almost 30 acres. And so I showed horses, and my brother showed horses as well. And so most of our weekends and time was consumed with, farm responsibilities and all that sort of thing. And as we got
hard work.
Yeah. It's the whole Christmas season, you see your presents there and then you're like, oh yeah, but you have, 10 horses that need taken care of out there. So you go and do the barn chores and all that before you open up Christmas presents or anything like that. And so as we got older though, my brother, he was more into the horsepower than the horses. And so he got into dirt bike racing, which led to car racing. And him and my dad were huge car guys. My dad and him built a car. I can't remember. Richard was probably 10. And so our weekends we actually didn't really go to church that much. Yeah. And my parents did a lot of amazing things for people, but we spent our weekends either at the racetrack, my dad and my brother, or at a horse show somewhere in the country, my mom and I. And so my mom and I traveled a ton growing up and everything. And so in high school, I actually ended up leaving public school. I went to Pickerington and homeschooled.
Okay.
In high school. That way I could.
What was the reason? More time?
Just so I could travel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So I could travel showing horses and stuff. And
let me ask this question. Because I think it had to be shaping for you having all those chores as a young person. What kind of shaping of your life did that do for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just the responsibility of knowing that it's more about something else other than yourself. Yeah, you want to eat breakfast, but so do 10 horses that will not get to eat breakfast unless you go out and take care of them and all of that.
And those horses were probably family, weren't they?
Yeah. We only ever had a couple ourselves, and then we always boarded horses. Okay. That way we could, it helped pay for the farm and everything.
It's not cheap. My understanding, owning a horse is
Oh no, we always laugh and joke, and we're so just so you know, the cheapest part of having a horse is buying it. So the rest, it just gets more expensive from there. Yeah. You don't even want to add up everything. But it was it did shape so much of who I am just because of the responsibility and everything. And so that's why it's as a mom now, with 4 little ones, it's hard because I'm okay, I'm asking you to fold your clothes. This is not a big deal.
Do you ever go, when I was a kid,
listen,
I had to feed the horses in the snow multiple times
all the time. Yeah. Yes.
In the pouring rain.
Yes.
I'm sure that made you tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then as my brother got older, he still helped, his role kind of transitioned, and he was the one fixing all the things. And, he's just super handy like my dad. Okay. And so he'd be the one working on the tractors and all the all the equipment stuff. So. Okay.
So you left public school and now you have more time. What year was that in high school?
I was a freshman.
Okay.
Yeah, I was only there for a couple weeks, and I was getting ready for the Quarter Horse Congress that happens here in Columbus every October.
That's huge.
It's the largest single breed horse show in the world.
It's crazy.
It is. And so we were getting ready to leave, and the principal called my mom at the time, and she was like, I just want you to know that we're going to have to expel her if she misses any more days. And my mom's like, doesn't she have a 4.0? And they were like, yeah, but that doesn't matter. She's like, but she has a 4.0. And they were just like super against me missing time. And my parents were very big into, you learn more from the world than you can in a school setting sometimes. And so they wanted us to have those experiences over just, being glued down to, just being in school.
Well, how you did a 4.0 and did all this is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I couldn't do the 4.0. I couldn't do half of that. Well, okay.
Well,
right. Full time at school. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So we were, so it was like come September, my parents had already worked it out. And so we go, they're like, okay, so we haven't told the school officially yet. Like, I hope nobody from Pickerington local schools is listening. They're like, we haven't told the school officially yet, but once we get through the Congress, like you can just homeschool if you want. And I was like, awesome, let's do that. And so, so I got all my books and I've stacked them from largest to smallest in my locker. And I shut the locker and I left and I never came back.
How'd that feel?
I don't know. It was like kind of weird because it was like nobody else knew. And so I was like, okay, see you later. But like I had like friends at school, but they were just really friends because I wanted someone to eat lunch with, not really because we were like close, because they were all into different things. And, and I think growing up on a farm, you do have like a different set of responsibilities and, and stuff like that. Like you have to carry, a different level of maturity and stuff because you're dealing with, injured horses and stuff like that. And so it was just a little different. So those kids were not the ones I spent my time with. And so, so it was like, it was just kind of weird. You just like walk out and you're just like, okay.
Well, I would ask the question, did it hurt you socially? But having known you, like it did not hurt you nor hamper you socially. You're a very social person.
Yeah.
I think if anything, you probably have too many friends, which I don't know if that's possible to have, but just the kind of person you are. So I do got to say this though. I'm honored and privileged today to sit across the table. I think I told the story a couple weeks ago. I was the kindergarten big wheel champion of, but you were not only a city champion, a state champion, a national champion, but I am sitting across the table, ladies and gentlemen, from a world champion. Not just once, not just twice. I could keep going on that. 9-time world champion.
It's true.
Come on. That's to me, that's like, and you said, I think we were talking earlier that you're one of your horses. So maybe explain your 9-time world champion, how that worked, what that was, and then the Hall of Fame. Gotta hear about this.
Okay. So, so growing up, I really just showed like locally in Ohio, the Ohio Association. I showed quarter horses. I should clarify that. So quarter horses, and so most people would be like, "Oh, did you do?" They know of like the jumping because you watch the Olympics, and it is like completely different. There's a lot of different things. There's like speed events. It's like contesting. And then there's like trail events. And there's a whole slew of different things. Okay. I showed hunter under saddle and then ended up doing pleasure driving. Well, growing up, I did what they call the all around, which is just basically every event you can enter. I just did it all. And then when I went to college, after my last year youth, I sold the horse I'd shown the last couple of years of my youth career and bought Winston, a certified edition. And it was so funny because they had tried to sell him to a few different people in our industry, and everybody's like, man, that he's so talented, but like I don't know, like if because he was just we joke because we say in the quarter horse industry he has an X in front of his number, which means he's part thoroughbred, which means they're just like they run a little bit hotter, they're a little bit like crazy. So
but you're the horse whisperer, apparently.
Well, listen, I think we bought him in the end of January, and I just started college, and so in Wilmington, and so my mom.
What was your degree in? What were you going for?
Communications, journalism, and public relations was my degree, and actually, Chris and I met at Wilmington. Oh wow! So I'm on the phone, like the first time he meets me, I'm like on the phone trying to make sure we get this deal worked out, getting this horse while I'm meeting him and stuff like that, and so they're like, yep, we got him. And so brought him home from Florida, and that thing tested every ounce of my strength. Like the first time I rode him, I took him outside, and I was just used to these like laid back quarter horses that you could just jump on. And so I just took him out. It's a beautiful day in February in Ohio. I'm like, I'm going to ride outside. Well, I had never had a thoroughbred before. And like that thing launched me straight up into the air. I have never hit the ground so hard. And like, I was just like, this is not good. This is
Sounds
not
like
good.
a bronco. Like,
It was, yes, he was crazy. And so like, gosh, I remember I would go to college and then I would go down to Wilmington and then I'd come home every Friday and I would ride Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I'd get back to school Sunday night, late Sunday night for Monday morning classes. And I remember walking and I was like stiff, like could not like sit down. I'm like sitting in a school chair, like couldn't move my body because my body was so sore. Wow. And so it was a lot of hours. It was a lot of like, I don't know if this is worth it. I remember telling my parents, like, I don't think it's going to work out. Like we need to sell him. And so, so that whole summer we showed and everything. And then there was like one show in Oklahoma where it was just, we had been on the road for like 3 weeks at different shows and stuff. And he finally laid down in his stall and he like never had laid down. And I went in and I just sat next to him and I just like rubbed the top of his head and his ears because he's just a horse that was like super scared about anybody. He's also, I should say, he's 17 2 hands, which is very large for a quarter horse. So to him, it's kind of like if you're a tall person, you're not used to things being over your head. Yeah. So he was super scared of things, you know, above his head and everything. And so when he laid down, I just went in and I just rubbed my hands all over him and stuff and just sat with him for like 2 hours in the stall. And then it was like, that was like the turning point. Like he just, things.
Sounds like a movie. This should be a movie, by the way. I feel like I've seen this movie.
So anyway. It's like things just started to mesh. And we went on that year as hard as it started. We ended up winning the High Point in the Nation that year. And then I did have somebody try to buy him at the World Show that fall. And we just couldn't negotiate the deal. Like I didn't feel, again, here I am, a freshman in college, like on the phone, like working out this deal.
Was it a considerable amount higher than what you paid for him now at this point?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was more than double.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, and so I was like, no, like I just couldn't come to terms with it. And I'm like, nope, I think this is my final number that I'm willing to like let him go at. And so if that's not okay with you, then we'll just, go our separate ways. And so the people ended up walking. And so that next year we went ahead and that was the 2003 and we ended up winning the World Show for the first year that year. And
what did that feel like? All this work, all these years, work with this horse. What did that feel like winning the world championship?
It was like super surreal because you remember like I had started riding horses when I could walk. And so I showed like my whole life and like I would go to the Youth World Show and like never even make it out of a split. Like these classes are like, 100, 150, like, well, maybe some of them are close to 200, but like never even get called out of a split. So like, and I remember like crying to my mom, like, why am I doing this to myself? Like, why do I keep coming back? Like, I just can't like break through. Like, we don't have the money to like advertise and buy this super expensive stuff like everybody else. Like, why do I do this? Like, I should just stay in Ohio and just stay here. And so, it wasn't until our trainers that ended up moving to our working out of our farm had found this horse named Gilbert. And that was when they're like, you've got to get out. That's the problem is you're showing too much in a local area. You've got to go so other people can see, you and get more like experience in other places. And so that's when I really started to like flourish and be able to like have confidence in myself was through them, Bruce and Swell and Vickery. And, so I was reserved with that horse and then we sold him like immediately. He was amazing. And so then that's when I bought Winston. And, but the first year I won, the world championship, it was just like, we were all just like crying because it was like all those years of like working and working and working. It was like, oh, here it is. And I'll never forget. My mom was like, it was probably like the next year, I think. And she was like, Kristin, I've been thinking about it. And like, I really don't think you should go back to the World Show with Winston because, the likelihood that you'll win 2 years in a row it's so small. And like, that just doesn't really happen. And like, I don't want you to like get your hopes up and then it doesn't go well. And I was like, I know, Mom, but I'm like, but he's amazing. And we're like, at this point, we're just like, every year we're just getting like better and better together. I called him we're like peanut butter and jelly, like good separately, but way better when you put them together, right? And so, that's good. So then we go back the second year and I won again. And my mom was just like, I can't even, like, I don't like, That's crazy.
And tell me this too, isn't a lot of the people that have won or win in the past, I mean, they have a ton more money. They do this professionally, and then you're coming on the scene.
So I showed in the amateur, so I wasn't in the professional category. I always stayed a non-pro. Okay. And so, but I think the difference is I did start to do a lot more of it myself. So but I think looking back, I think that's what kind of set us apart is I knew that horse so well that towards the end, it kind of was the demise just because nobody else could ride him because it was just me and him. But so then the next year we went back after winning the 100 saddle twice in a row. And so we added pleasure driving. And then I ended up reserve, which is second, in the 100 saddle. And then won the pleasure driving that year. And then the next year I won the 100 saddle again. So it was 9 years in a row we were first or second in both of our classes, which is crazy.
How old is a horse, his prime? What would you say the years of
So in 100 saddle, like Winston, typically if they're around more than 3 years would be shocking. So they usually move on to different events, because
it's for the age of the animal.
Yes, because it's also they get really smart, and so most of them will start to what we call cheat you in the pen. So they're smart animals, so they know what the gates are going to be called and all of that. So they start to test you a lot more, and so typically you end up doing the all around with them, like I did with my previous horses, which is classes with patterns and different things and whatnot, But Winston just loved his job. He knew when he was on, and he was just, it's unbelievable.
He's a show horse.
Unless you see it, you would never understand it, right? Yeah. Well, Jesus, I mean, come on. Yeah. And so he just had a level of competition within him that he knew what type of show we were at. If we were at a local show in Ohio, man, that thing, he was so bad. He would be offended that I took him to a small show. And then you go to the world show, and then he wins, and it's just it's crazy. I can't even describe it. So
that's pretty incredible. Yeah. That's pretty incredible. So well, cool. I'm glad you shared that. Definitely wanted people to hear that.
Yeah.
So how'd you meet Chris?
So we met the very first day I went down. Of course, I was showing horses, so I couldn't start in the fall because I had to finish out my youth career because, that was important. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So I delayed and I started at Wilmington in January. And the funny thing about that is I was actually supposed to go to Ohio University. And right before I was signing my papers to OU, I got a packet in the mail from Wilmington offering me a bunch of scholarships for academics and everything else. And so I was I didn't really want to go to a big school anyways, but it was just my parents, it was, hey, we'll pay for your tuition, but you're responsible for room and board. They wanted us to have skin in the game. And so, so I couldn't afford a private school. And so when I got that package from Wilmington, it made it feasible. Okay. We could do it. And so I ended up transferring and just signing all the papers to go to Wilmington. And then I met Chris. Actually, I moved into, he was doing cross country.
Now, just for the people listening, your husband is a multi-sport collegiate athlete.
Yes.
Chris Martin. So,
he's the most athletic person I've ever seen. I don't even
I know he's going to listen to this and watch it. That was for you, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. He would try to teach me tennis in college because I really I showed horses my whole life. So I didn't have any sports experience. So I really wanted to try something and be on a team sport. And so he was trying to teach me.
Yeah, world champion wasn't enough. Let me try to,
Oh, let me tell you. He tried to teach me tennis, and I was on the team technically, but, never really played a match. But it was just one of those. I wanted to try it. And so we met, and we started dating 2 weeks later, and then we got married a couple months after we graduated. Yeah. And we've been married 17 years now.
Wow, that's awesome.
I know. It's crazy.
Now tell me this. Tell me your spiritual journey. What'd that look like to find Jesus?
Yeah. So Chris says there's two kinds of journeys. There's one where it's you have an experience where you're just moved and you instantly understand and accept Jesus. And then there's those times where it's just a little bit over time. And then, I would say both of us were kind of the little bit over time. And so Chris grew up Catholic. My family, we didn't grow up connected to a church. And so it wasn't until I met Chris and he was passionate about hey, when we get married, I want to go to church on Sunday. And we went to, we tried the Catholic church, and I just didn't it was just didn't feel quite comfortable for me. Like just, I think not knowing anything, it's just a lot to, there's just a lot more to it. And so we started going to Faith United Methodist here in Canal, and we were there for, we've been here 8 years. So, like 8-9 years.
You started having kids.
Yeah. And so it was, we loved the people there. They were just amazing. But after we had Aubrey, Chris and I, who's the third. Yeah. The boys are twins. They're 10 and Aubrey's 8. And so we had her, and I told Chris, I was like, what are we doing? We're like packing up these kids on Sunday morning and coming here, and there are no other kids because we're the youngest people in the congregation. And one of us is sitting in one of the rooms with our children. I'm like, this doesn't feel like, I want them to be connected to other kids. Like I want them to walk in, that kind of like friendship where, life is hard, journeys are hard. And I want them to have other friends that, are their age and, going through all of this together. So we, Chris's cousin, Brooke Kurz, their family has attended C3 forever. They're amazing. Yeah. And so we went to Evan's baby dedication at the old building in Pickerington. Okay. And we're all about honesty. I remember I told Chris, I was like, oh my gosh, it is so loud in here. Why is it so dark and so loud? And like the boys are like crying. And I was like, what is happening? And so we're like, okay, well maybe that's not the right fit. And so, but God just kept working on our heart. Well, in the meantime, C3 ended up moving to the high school.
Yeah.
And so we're like, you know what? Like, I just feel like, if we're going to change churches, we want them to know someone, and like they'll know Evan. And at that point, Cora wasn't even born. And so we're like, we want them, like that will give them some comfort and stuff. And so, so we're like, okay, we're going to try it again. And so we came back, and it's funny how like different stages of your life, it was only like a few months, but it was like, yeah, this feels like right. This feels like home. And so, so we just were coming every week and got involved and started serving, right away. And it was crazy because one of my still very, very best friends, Stacy Petty, was the children's pastor. And when we walked up, she was like, you have kids, Blake and Brady? And then we like learned her story and walked through all that. And we're like, oh my gosh, what are the chances and odds of that? And so we became really quick and fast friends with them.
Cool.
And so we just... I don't know. I remember, I think the biggest turning point for me was when I started to own my faith journey. I think a lot of people assumed, because Chris and I are super well grounded, that we just like had grown up in church all our lives, and like, because we were just like, anything we can do to help, we want to help. And so it wasn't until Emily Barney asked me to be a part of the women's ministry. And I remember I was like really debating, because I like deep down I really wanted to say yes, but then I felt like this like guilt, and I'm like, I finally sat down with her and I said, Emily, I really want to say yes, but I think I need to like be honest with you. And she's just like looking at me like, okay. And I was like, I've never read the Bible. And she was just like sat there, and she was like, that's okay. Do you love Jesus? And I was like, yes. And she's like, are you reading your Bible now? And I was like, yes, but like I haven't gone through the whole thing. She's like, and I was like, and I still don't understand very much of it. And so she was like, that's okay. She's like, I want you a part of this team. And so
that's awesome.
So I accepted, and I ended up on the women's ministry team. And that was like groundbreaking for me. Like that's when I owned my own, like, it's okay. I don't have to be ashamed of it. Like God wrote my story. Like it wasn't important to me when I was younger. It wasn't important to me until, 7.5, 8 years ago. And so, but that's how he planned my journey. And like, there's nothing to be ashamed of. Yeah. And so I like shared that in like small groups with people and everything. And like, this is my journey. I'm just reading the Bible for the first time, and, all of that. And then, fast forward, I think it was we did the Women Alive conference, and then the very next year, Pastor Dan asked me to lead the next women's conference. It escalated quickly, as we would say.
That is awesome. Yeah. When you started talking about that, I almost tear up, because I was like, that's the whole reason C3 Church was planted, right?
Right.
And I'll just say this, it has been amazing just watching you grow in your faith, and, and then me and Chris too. I mean, you guys are such an integral part now of a lot of the relationships in this church, and just huge investment. Let's get onto this. I know, You got 4 kids now.
Yes.
Yeah.
4. We added Cooper.
Ooh.
Added Cooper.
How old's Cooper now?
2.5.
2.5.
So, so that's
Okay.
fun to be almost turning 40. And he's getting in and out of his crib now. And so we've had to do that transition and the potty training and all that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot what this felt like to be going through all of this, because the other kids are, significantly older. Yeah. But it's also been one of those, he's just been incredible for our family in so many ways. Like just been a light, a reason to laugh and smile and all of those things, because he's just awesome. And which our family has really needed.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you definitely know, I think, if everyone that knows you knows kind of the situation you guys are in and battling through. Mm-hmm. And so, man, why don't you tell that story?
Okay. Yeah. Well, last June, 2021, on June 9th, our son Brady was diagnosed with high-risk pre-B cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is a mouthful. So we'll just call it ALL or leukemia.
Okay.
It was high risk because he came in with a 606,000 white blood count, which normal range is like 10.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it wasn't. It was like a couple weeks in when they finally, we just kept hearing how high his white blood count was and everything, and Chris is like, okay. So at rounds one morning, he's like, so we keep hearing how high it is. Like high is what? I mean, in the normal, they're like top 5 cases we've ever seen here in Columbus. And we're like, oh, okay. So that painted the picture so we knew a little bit better of what we were dealing with. This was not a normal case. And so then a couple weeks later, I'll never forget, we were sitting in his hospital room. He had been readmitted after his first 10 days of treatment. Then he came home for I think it was 48 hours, and it was just it was really brutal and bad. And so they had to readmit him on a Monday morning. And so it was in that second stay when his oncologist came in, and she's just amazing. We feel like God had literally sent her for our son, because she's just been just incredible. And she sat down on the couch, and I was like, huh. She doesn't normally come in and sit down. This is, she's got something to share.
Something's going to be heavy.
Yeah. And so she was like, okay. So because he came in so high risk, we always, we do these tests to figure out, is there an indicator of why his white blood count was so crazy? And she's like, so what? It just came back, and what we found is he actually has this mutation. It's called a Philadelphia-like mutation, because it's similar to a Philadelphia mutation, but it's not that. So they just call it because they don't know how else to categorize it. And she's like, so it gives us a reason of why his white blood count is just out of control. And so we're like, okay, so what does that what does it mean when you say? Because she said it's just extremely rare, and I was like, okay, so tell me about extremely rare. She's like, well, they've only documented it 64 other times in the world, and so Brady's 65, and we're like, okay, that feels difficult. Mm-hmm. This feels different, and so she's.
Can I just ask this? How do you process that as a mom when you hear news like that?
So that was we had gotten through, that was probably 2.5 weeks in, and we had done really well, just taking everything as that came. And then that was just that final, straw. And I remember after she left, just I told Chris, I was like, I have to walk out. And so I had called some of my really close friends, and they all drove up to the hospital, and I just bawled my eyes out and just this is where we're at. So because most people, they'll hear, oh, it's ALL, that's in children now, it's a 90% survival rate. It's incredible. It used to be a death sentence.
Yeah.
And now it's 90 to 95. I think they're getting on 95. Now, that doesn't go to say all the secondary cancers these kids develop and everything else that comes with it. We don't really want to talk about all those things. We talk about the survival rate of the ALL. We don't talk about all the other problems that these kids face after. And so, but this was just oh, this feels different. And so we had always felt like God was going to make a way. And we always prayed from the very beginning to like, Lord, if we have to go through this, like let it be for something bigger than ourselves. Like let us shine some light and to people, and however we can love people, like we want to do that. And but I just remember like, but this feels like a mountain that I know I can't move.
Yeah.
But like, are you really going to move this big of a mountain? Like this feels pretty, like not only is he in a 1 in 65 in the world situation, but then like the survival rate to a year was like 60%, I think 64%, I think it was to a year. And this just feels unbelievably more difficult than just a standard risk ALL diagnosis. And so I just like lost it and cried a lot. And then pulled myself together, walked back in that hotel room and just, because Brady doesn't like, he was there. He's heard the whole thing. Yeah. But, when kids are going through stuff like that, I think it's that, God has a way of protecting us from things. It's kind of like, as a mom going through childbirth, like you don't remember how bad it was. Yeah. A few months later, you're just like, yeah, let's have another kid, 3 years later. And then you're like, you do it again. And you're like, what was I thinking? This is terrible. And so I think, we just have that part of our brain that kind of just like drowns out stuff. Yeah. And, and so we just like kind of like smiled and, okay, like this is just, God, you said you were going to make a way. Yeah. And man, we're going to need you to, because I can't see through the woods right now.
Yeah. And I know too, you've been really, really good about journaling this, which I know just a lot of people in our church, a lot of people outside of our church have that know you, that are following your story, have gleaned so much through. It's almost like, I feel like I'm reading where David, in the Bible's going through difficult times, and he's putting like his prayer journal and like what God's teaching him, what he's learning. And you do have a gift. I just want to commend you have a gift for writing.
Thank you.
And so I know a lot of people have really been blessed by just watching you walk through a difficult time. And you're so good at sharing the pain and the emotional side of it, but also where you're finding your strength. And it's been a gift. So I just want to say thank you for doing that. And then too, a lot of people, they follow the journey of what's happening. And is that, would you say that's an outlet for you?
Or 100%. It definitely is a way for me to process some of the hard things. And I think some of it too is just helping other people understand like how hard this is. Cause I think a lot of times we just walk and live in our own little bubble, and everything's good in our little bubble. And we don't always have the opportunity to see what's outside of our little bubble. Yeah. And so what we're going through is hard, but there are families that are going through things that are just even harder than we can imagine. And so it's like trying to just bring a little perspective, I think, of what it's like to live your life in a hospital away from your other family. And, just all the things that come up with complications from all the surgeries, all the medications and everything that they're throwing. It just, so it's very good for my heart to be able to kind of like get some of that weight off. Like, cause you feel like you're just carrying, right? And it's just like builds up. And then it's like, okay, no, like this helps me release it. Yeah. So
now let me ask this. I know, again, you having 3 other children. Yeah. What has this done? What kind of effect has this had on your family, on your other children? And then how have you and Chris as parents tried to walk them through this time, right? Because the majority of your focus on Brady, which it should be, is in a difficult season, but you're like, oh man, we have these other 3 kids. Right. Maybe dive into that.
It is not easy, I will tell you. Can't imagine. We have walked through a lot of hard conversations. I remember watching Aubrey just standing at the doorway, just scared, because she just, you're taking care of Brady, and because he's throwing up, and all of these things, like even me myself forget how hard some of this stuff has been, because it's just how we get through it. But I remember her standing at the doorway, and you could just see it on her face, and her face was just down, and she was just, I said, Aubrey, I'm like cleaning up throw up in the kitchen sink, and I see her, and I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, Mom, is Brady gonna die tonight? And like those are the moments where you realize that these kids are on the outside looking in, and they don't know. Yeah. I mean, they don't even know the statistics, right? There's a lot of stuff that we feel like our kids need to know a bunch, but then there's a lot that we feel like they don't need to know. Like they need to know the severity and the realness of where we stand, but then they also don't need to know all the possibilities of what things could look like. And so, but you realize in those moments that like they're witnessing it all, like they're watching it all
in real time.
Yeah. And like just the fact that she was brave enough to express that, I was so proud of her. And so it's like trying to commend them for those times when they're brave enough to ask those hard questions, that you know that they're feeling, but still having the response that we want to in that moment of, okay, well, I have one kid over here so sick, but then like I need to take care of him, but then I also have her over here and her heart is so sick. Like, so which one do you tend to first? Yeah. And you have to make those decisions. And thankfully, Chris and I are super strong. And so we can normally like tag team those kinds of things. And, but it is hard. I mean, I've had, sitting by Blake at bed and he would say, Mom, I'm going to be honest with you. And you're just like waiting for it. You're like, okay. And he's like, if Brady dies, I don't know if I can trust God again. And I'm like, what do you say as a parent to that? Yeah. And you sit there and I'm like, take my time. And I'm like, that's fair. I feel like he would think that was fair because we don't have the luxury of knowing all that he knows, Blake. We don't have the understanding. We don't get to see the whole picture. We're not witnessing everything that he has for, our family and Brady and what that looks like. And so then it's like, stepping back and I'm like, but the truth is, Blake, what we need to look at is how blessed we have been. Like we've had so much more time with Brady than most would say we should have. And so we could look at it as, man, I could be so mad at God. I could not trust him. I could, all these things that we could be mad about. I'm like, but, 16 months ago, they told us like, if he made it to a year, he would be, in the, 50% kind of situation. And so here we are. And I was like, Blake, look at all the soccer games you got to play with Brady, all the baseball games you've gotten to play, all this, he's gotten to go to school with you. I'm like, there are kids in Brady's situation or, others that like, they never got this chance. Like, look at all these moments that you have gotten to spend with him. And he just like laid there and he was like, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess that's a good way to look at it. But it's like, if we wouldn't have taken that time and had that like foundation of faith to begin with, like how different could that conversation have gone? Like I would be mad too, Blake. I would be furious. I don't think I could trust him. You know what I mean? Like, and so, so I'm so grateful. And like, we pray every night, like, Lord, just give us the peace and the understanding, to get through every day and every conversation and, to glorify you through it. And
let me ask this question. What would maybe someone's watching or listening today and they're walking through one of the most difficult times of their life, whether it's a sickness or an illness to them or a loved one, or maybe just feel like their world is crashing down. What would you say to them? What would you say to someone who finds himself in a situation like that?
Yeah. I would say I felt that way too. Like we've maybe not been in their shoes exactly, but been in a place where you can't understand. And so the thing that has helped us has been shifting our perspective and finding the good in it. And I know people will say, well, that's impossible. Okay, well, I would challenge you on that because I don't know that it is impossible because we've been in some pretty impossible situations. And yes, it's not easy. It's not easy to take that road. It's not what our flesh wants us to do, but it's what helps our heart. Yeah. Our heart is healed by helping others and shining light to others. So like finding the good, even if it's just, a mustard seed of goodness, like in the day of like finding that goodness. Or a lot of times I look around and I think, it is bad. Like there isn't any good that has happened today. like, I can't think of a single good thing that has happened. And maybe they're in that situation too. Like, but I'm telling you, I have been in, months of whatever, and I don't have a single good thing to say. Okay, well then be the good thing. Go be the good thing. If you can't find the good thing, then be it.
That's good. I think that should be the title of your next book. Your first book. That's powerful. Let me ask this question. How has walking, and it's not like you're walking through it still.
Yeah.
How has walking through this difficult time shaped your relationship with God?
Oof.
Good or bad?
I would say, honestly, all good, because, and I don't say that just to like, hey, look at us. Like, no, it really is like, even the hard things, I think you're learning to trust at a whole other level, and change your view of the world in a way that's like, you can't understand what other people are walking through unless you've walked through something hard. And I remember a few years ago when we went through a season, it was just like one thing after another. It started with my dad passing away, and then it was just like the next 6 months, it was like every couple weeks, it was like something majorly bad had happened. And I remember one of my best friends, Kelly Zimmerman, had said, Kristin, I feel like God is just giving you a Rolodex of like all these things so you can better understand whatever's ahead. And I remember, I will never forget her saying that. We were sitting in the parking lot, getting ready to go into service. And I was just like crying because I'm like, I don't want to be that person that's always in the mud. Like, that's just not a good place to be. And she's like, but before this, like, you haven't experienced any. And I was like, you're right. Like, we haven't. Like, we'd been super sheltered. Like, we've been in that bubble, that perfect little, oasis bubble, and hadn't had to deal with really hard things. And so I feel like this journey, this cancer journey, and watching our, almost losing our son a couple of times, and everything that it has meant has been so eye-opening. Like, there's been different things. Like, he's been on medication where if you would have walked into the room and didn't know Brady, you thought he was mentally handicapped. Like, he would just fixate on something, and like the drool was just like running out of his mouth, and his hands were like locked in position, and he would just shake, and he would just like, there's like this empty stare, and you're just like, this is what it's like to have a child or a loved one with a mental disability. Like, I didn't know what that felt like, and now I do.
Wow.
And I only had it for a few days, and it was terrifying. Yeah. And so it's like, now I'm going to have a little more compassion when I see someone in that situation, because I remember what it was like. Yeah. I remember what it's like to see my son hooked up with 16 lines of medication going into 3 different parts of his body on a vent and everything, BiPAP machine. And the doctors were like, listen, we feel like we have to be honest with you. You've asked us to be honest, and we're just going to tell you right now, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Yeah. Like, his whole body, his organs are all shutting down. This was after his bone marrow transplant in the ICU. They're like, he's septic shock, and the infection's just going everywhere. And so we just need to prepare you for what's to come. And I remember just like, the doctor left, and I just like cried, and I'm like, there's 16 lines of medication in 3 different places of his body. How can this get any worse? Like, I don't understand. Like, we can't even find the source of what's caught, and so we're just like, how is this gonna, I don't understand. I couldn't fathom it. And we just like, gosh, Chris and I prayed so hard. And what do? We just continued to we couldn't see the good in anything that was happening. So there were a couple of nurses in the PICU and a couple of the doctors that we just always tried to be so kind. And Chris was always like teasing them to try to lighten the mood, because, their job is
Chris, if you know Chris.
Right.
That's Chris, yeah.
But their job is so serious, and it's like
heavy.
And it's heavy. And parents aren't always handling information in the ways that like Chris and I were able to handle it. And so, yes, we have our momentary, we just lose it, but then it's like, okay, but God said he was going to make a way. And so we're here. What can we do? So brought in cake pops for all the staff, all that kind of stuff as much as we could. And it was like, I remember it was like 24, 36 hours later after the doctor had prepared us for all the worst things that were going to happen. And they're like, well, we don't understand, but his heart that was shutting down and failing is now perfectly restored and functioning normally. And we're like, don't understand, huh? Okay, got it. And they're like, and, his lungs are clear. And so we don't understand that. And I'm like, okay, well, I understand. And so, and they moved him back up to the 12th floor. And so it's like those moments where we look back and we're like, what if we had to go through all that because we got to impact one person, one staff member in that ICU? Yeah. Now, it stunk. Didn't want to watch your kid go through that. You don't want to watch your kid almost, die. But, that's how God likes to do it sometimes. So let's do this. Let's fast forward from that moment to where we are now. Take a couple minutes, and I realized a whole lot went on during that. But to get us to where he is today. Yeah. So we'll abbreviate it. So that, what I'm talking about, happened in December after his bone marrow transplant. Blake was a perfect match. Brady was unable. He was considered refractory, which, shocker with everything else he has going on. Refractory just means that typical chemotherapy does not work on your leukemia. Big surprise. And so we ended up having to go through a couple different avenues to get him into remission, to then go straight to a bone marrow transplant provided by his brother. And so then that's when all the complications happened, and then it was, that was into January. We were dealing with so many stomach issues and all kinds of complications from that. But then by March, end of February, I think, is when soccer training started. And that kid was determined he was going to be at soccer training. Yeah. It was either the end of...
Where does he get this drive? I don't know.
And so I was like, who am I to tell him no? Right? Who am I to tell him no? Brady, you want to go play soccer? Go for it. Wear a hat, sweatshirt, gloves, winter pants. And so that's what he did. He didn't miss a single soccer training session in the spring season. And I'm literally looking at this kid you just had a bone marrow transplant. So we go into his 100-day checkup, and the physical therapist is like, so we're supposed to have you walk down the hall and stuff like that. She's like, how are you feeling? Are you walking okay? I was like, oh, he's playing doing 2-hour soccer trainings twice a week. And she was like, what?
Come again?
And she was like,
last name's Martin.
And they're just like, this isn't how this goes normally. And I'm like, well, that's how it's going with him. And so he played soccer, and then he ended up getting cleared early, actually, to play baseball. He really wanted to play baseball. And with bone marrow transplants, you have to be super careful about the air you breathe. And so because of the dirt on, you can't, he still can't be he can't garden. He can't be around any kind of soil like that. But in true Brady Martin fashion, he convinced them that, the dirt is clean because there's no animals or livestock on it. And so and so they're like, I feel like you have a valid point. And so I would say, go ahead. And so he started playing baseball. So he played soccer and baseball into the first part of the summer. And it was in July, and he started complaining about his foot hurting. And I was like, this is just really weird. He would wake up in the middle of the night and it just hurt so bad. He would be crying. And at this point, we're far enough removed from all of these extremely hard things that you almost forget that it was like that. So you have a little less patience. So I remember Chris was like, it is so hard for me right now. I feel like he is just this is crazy. Why is he crying so much about his foot hurting? And there was just something in my gut that was this isn't right. And so I brought it up to his bone marrow transplant doctor, and it was a couple weeks, and I was like, no, seriously, this is getting really bad. And so we went in actually to the emergency room. They had us go in because sports medicine couldn't get any x-rays. And so he had x-rays on a Thursday, all clear, showed it again on the Monday, all clear. And his foot pain is just out of control at this point, and starting into the other one. And I told Chris, I was like, and it's only at night. So if you know anything about cancers and bone cancers, the pain is always bad at night, and it's excruciating. You can't even, it basically feels like the insides of your bone is just pressing out and going to explode your bone. And so I was just like, when it was only happening at night, I was like, something's going on. And so we ended up getting an MRI, and they're even looking at the MRIs. And it wasn't until the sports medicine doctor called, I guess, his bone marrow transplant doctor and was like, hey, have you thought that this kid could be relapsing? And she's like, there's no way. We just had a 1 in a million cell level test done June 14th. And it was clear. Like there were some markers for some possibility things, but like nothing we're concerned about. So like the chance that he's relapsing to this extreme this soon after a 1 in a million test is like extremely unlikely. And he was like, like the way he's describing this pain and when it's coming, onsetting. And so we went home, and he ended up getting super sick over the weekend, and his stomach was just upset, and then he ended up with nosebleeds. And if you know anything about cancer, your platelets go down, and when your platelets are super low, your nosebleeds. So he ended up with like a 3-hour nosebleed, and they had him come in, and they did. By that point, the leukemia, his white blood count was crazy again, and so it was already in his peripheral blood, so they could pull it out right off of a blood test. They didn't even have to do a biopsy to see the cancer. They could see it from the blood test. And so that was super hard, because then I'm there having to have the conversation with him again to tell him, it's come back, and 6 months after his transplant. So that was rough.
Yeah.
So now they have to figure out a game plan and everything. And so we started treatment, and he was in the ICU again for too long. And then at that time I had somebody reach out to me, and they're like, hey, we know this guy, and his daughter went to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And like, I don't know, we just feel like maybe you should connect with him. Like, here's his name and stuff. So I connected with them, because at this point we're like, when your kid relapses this close after bone marrow transplant, it's a no good situation. And so I connected with him, and we were just talking. I was kind of trying to explain, like, because Brady's is not complicated, but there's a lot of pieces to it and everything. And so he was like, yeah, our daughter just finished this clinical trial at, we'll call it CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and they're amazing. And here's the direct contacts to the people in charge of the program. Like, you can reach out to them. And so I reached out to them, and we were talking at the same time with like his oncologist and the transplant team there. And so when we were just going through it, we're like, okay, so what are our options? And the options looked like it was going to be this new therapy called CAR T therapy, some people call it. And what it does is it harvests the cells out of them, and then it trains your cells to fight your cancer. And then it gives it back. And this whole thing is like literally just turned 10 years old. Like, that's how new it is. And so Children's here in Columbus had only done it like on 15 patients. And we're just like, ooh, with everything, like, this is our like last and only shot. Like, so we were talking to, and some of the talk there was not from Brady's oncologist, but some of the other team members was, we should do CAR therapy to a second bone marrow transplant. And we're like, nope, we don't feel good about that. Like, especially because of Brady's case and how hard it was the first bone marrow transplant, and then to do a second one this soon after. Like, the stories, when I tell you people's stories are harder than ours, I'm not even exaggerating. Like, these kids that go through second and third bone marrow transplants, like, their body just starts to fight itself until they pass away. Like, skin is falling off. All their organs just begin to just attack each other. Like, the cells just attack their own organs and everything. And Chris and I are like, that's just not an option. Like, we love our son, but like, I'm not going to watch him walk through that. And so that was a decision. Like, those are the decisions you're like walking through and making, and you're just like, gosh. And so, so at that point we'd been in contact with CHOP over in Philadelphia, and they were looking at his case, and they're like, yeah, we want you to come out and go through everything. And so they actually have a clinical trial out there that's only a few years old. Okay. I think it's like maybe 3 years old. And so Brady's patient number 70 something out of what will be 100 for the total trial. And it's called the Hucart. And so it's basically taking his cells, and instead of, they use like a mouse protein, I think, to develop the cells, the first, like in this original version of it. And this time they're, the Hucart is because it's called humanized. And so they're actually making these cells look more human. So they're having like way better responses. And so we're just waiting right now. His levels are still just not to where they need to be to go back to Philly. So, you know, of course he's out playing soccer, and he'll play his last soccer game of the season on Saturday. Okay. And then we're just waiting for his cells to recover to be able to go back to Philadelphia. And that'll be a 5-week at minimum hospital, like in and out.
Definitely be praying for that.
Yes.
I do want to hit in these last few minutes of kind of something that's come out of this difficult time, right? You're one, if you don't see the good, just, what is it, do the good?
Yeah. Be the good.
Be the good. Yeah, be the good. And so the whole way to battle.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe talk about that.
Yeah. So it was, we started off with, the page was just called Way to Battle, because when we were in the hospital during Brady's like first couple admissions, I just kept hearing, when he was playing baseball, his coach saying, "Way to battle, Brady, you know, way to battle." That's what happens when, you know, if you're a baseball person, the count is full and you keep fouling it off, you know, you just got to keep going. Like, you just keep going, way to battle. And so we're like, I just kept hearing it. And so we named it Way to Battle. And then, it was in the summer, sometime last year, we were having to go to the hospital for another chemo treatment. And Brady was like, did not want to go. And I did not want to go either. And I basically like just, I don't want to say forced him in the car, but like, buddy, like, we just don't have an option. Like, I'm really sorry, but this is like, we have to be there. We have to be there this time. This is just what we have to do. And so he's like, we're driving to Children's, and he's like just still upset and just still frustrated that he has to go. And I'm like, I'm sorry, there's just no other choice. And then I'm just like, in my head, I'm just like thinking through, like, what does this kid love to do? What does he love to do? He loves to give. He loves to serve. He loves to like help other people. Like, that's his heart. Like, whatever there's, you know, he loves to give donuts to people. He loves to like drop off random things. Like, that's just who he is. I'm like, okay, Brady, how about this? How about we like go to the hospital with a mission of serving and loving someone? Like, let's find someone to give something to. And he just like perked up, and he was like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, what if we like someone, we just go and we like find a way to like buy their lunch or buy something for them at the gift shop or something. I don't know. Like, we'll figure it out, but like, let's go and like, let's find someone to bless while we're there. And he was like, okay. And so we get there, and we're of course running late because he had not wanted to go anyways. And so he's hooked up to chemo and everything. And there was a nurse that was Brady's nurse a couple weeks prior, and she had shared her story with us. And she was getting ready to have a little girl, and they knew she was going to have a lot of heart issues and was going to have immediate like open heart surgery. And so we were sitting in there, and Brady's playing on his iPad, and when the nurse came in, I was like, I know that like you guys can't like talk to us about these things, but I know Mary was getting ready to have a baby, and I know that she said that it was going to need immediate surgery. Can you just like, is everything okay? I've just been like thinking and praying for them so hard. And she was like, yeah, she's here right now. And I was like, really? And Brady was like, Mom, that's who we need to. I was like, I thought the same thing, Brady. So, So we went down to the gift shop, and we had Mary's full name. And so we were able to, Brady picked out a pink fluffy unicorn and a couple other things. And we sent it to the room. I wrote in the card, and the scripture God had put us on our hearts was, "You've armed me with strength for the battle." And so that's what we were up against, you know, right? We need to be armed with strength. And so I wrote that, and I said, you know, I just want you to know that like you have been armed with strength for the battle. Whatever's coming, whatever will be, like, you are strong enough to get through it. And had sent that card to her. And so we left, and Brady was like so excited, and like just had like, it just like totally turned his day around. So then the next week we went back, and he was like, can we do it again? And I was like, sure. Why not? So I'm like, at this point, you know, you're just like throwing money at stuff, right? Like, I mean, sure, whatever. So he buys a couple stuffed animals from the gift shop and he just like walks around the hospital and like finds kids to just give them to. Because there's always a ton of kids walking around from procedures and appointments. And so that's how it like kind of started. And I was like, what if I was like out, like they were playing soccer and I was like, what if we did it? Like, what if it was like a nonprofit? Like, what if we bought a bunch of animals and we did it ourselves? Like, they could have collars on them and it would say, you know, battle, you know, because our kids love dogs and they love animals in general, but dogs for sure. And so, so we found a manufacturer and we were buying all these stuffed dogs and, you know, have a logo and we get these collars made, say battle pups armed with strength on it. And I'm like, you know, and so that's how it kind of like started and blossomed. And so now we've given over 3,000 of these battle pups. Yeah. We take them every time we go to the hospital. It's like a reason to go. It gives us a purpose. Like nobody wants to go to the hospital. Yeah. No one. And, but every time we go, we're always moved. Like there is always at least one situation that we're like, God is working in and through this. Like it's so crazy. Powerful. And so, so we take 12 every time and we have just absolutely incredible stories that I write about on, our page and everything about the different interactions that we have. And, so it started as like, hey, we know what Brady is going through is super hard, but what we also know is that it's equally as hard on Brady or on Aubrey and Blake as well. Yeah. And so when we started the battle pups, we're like, it's going to be for all of them. It's all the kids in the family or all the people in the family get one because that way it unites them together. Huh. And when they're separated from each other, it's like their token of like, but we're a team kind of thing. That's cool. Is the mentality. That's like what we thought about it. And so that started really, we're like, okay, cancer families, because that's what was happening to us, right? And then we're like, but there's a lot of people going through hard things. And so we're like, it's for everyone going through a hard thing. And so now it's been really cool because it's just like blossomed. And now we're not only sending them to kids, but also like grandparents who have been diagnosed with cancer or any number of things. Any age group of people are, you know, nominating for these battle pups, and we're working with schools and we're giving them to when a kid passes away at school or something tragic happens at the school, we show up with, you know, 100, 150 battle pups for like entire pods of classrooms or, you know, whatever it may be. And it's just like being able to be that encouragement is really cool. And then we have like different teachers and administrators from school, like these kids are still bringing these dogs with them. Like what happened like, you know, months and months ago, but like, and they're middle schoolers and they still bring them with them. Like what you're doing matters. Like this is like, and so we think about it. We're like, you know, it started as cancer, but you know, a lot of people can rally around cancer, but like who's rallying around the kids that like have just lost a parent? Wow. Right? Like there are so many kids that have lost people and, you know, or what about the kids that are going through a divorce? Divorce is so common now that it's like, you know, but when you have these kids that are young and everything is just completely changed in their life, like, can we be there for them? Like, you know, all these different situations that happen, we're just finding more and more ways to bring people together and let them know that, you know, we say like no one battles alone. Yeah.
I just love the fact that when you're going through the most difficult time in your life, you are not just focused on yourselves, but you're focused on others. It's that whole others focus in the midst of even your own pain, which, you know, I think helps gives purpose, right? Yeah. And you think what that's done. So it's, I don't know, I look in people's lives sometimes, and sometimes the most meaningful things are birthed in some of the most difficult soil.
100%.
You know, and you guys have definitely walked through that, and way to battle. I mean, God's given you and Chris such incredible influence. I mean, you're one of the only ones I know that in a few weeks away can put together a 5K and like half the community shows up. And I'm like, this is incredible. So God has given you guys incredible influence, and it's just so amazing to sit back and watch you steward it for his kingdom. And so I just want to say, man, you know, on behalf of C3 Church, man, we love you. We're praying for you.
Thank you.
You know, as you guys battle through this. And I do want to ask this, if maybe somebody who goes, man, how do I get involved with Way to Battle? How do I find you guys? What would be the best way?
So we have a website which we're wanting to really, redo that, revamp that a little bit. But that's the best way. Like, people can either go there to donate towards the mission if they want to donate. Then we have information on how to like send a check to our PO box and our Venmo and that sort of thing. But what's even most important to us is like, if you know someone going through something difficult and hard, like, you can jump on there and fill out our nomination form.
Cool.
And it's really cool now because we have it to where the person who nominates whoever can they receive an email when the battle pups are on their way to where they're going, and so they have the tracking information, so they can see when they're delivered and that sort of thing. And so that's really cool. So that's the biggest thing. Then we always have a need for people who want to help, like put stickers on bags or collar battle pups or whatever it might be. We're trying to grow and expand to love as many people as we can.
That is awesome.
So it's just waytobattle.com. And then our Facebook blog is just Way to Battle.
Okay.
So.
Well, cool. Well, Kristin, as we wrap this up again, I just want to say thanks. Thanks for coming on here and sharing your story. And I believe there's going to be a lot of people that are blessed by you guys' story. And so, who knows? Maybe in the future we'll have you back on to go, okay, where are we at now?
Yeah.
And but I think if nothing else, you're going to have a lot of people that have listened to this that are going to be praying.
Thank you.
Yeah, for you guys and for Brady.
So much.
And so again, we're so grateful for all who have made time to be a part of this, the C3 podcast with Kristin Martin. And so we hope to see you guys next week.
Thanks for joining us on the C3 podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Have a great day, and we'll see you on our next episode of the C3 podcast.